Apologies from Ian McCrae. Any other apologies? No. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 9. Members content with those?
Yep.
Summary table request, pages 11 to 13 of your packs. Moving straight into the briefing from NIPSA. Refer members to documents pages 77 through to 126. Morning, Brian.
Morning, how are you?
It's going to be like a quick fire round this morning, Brian.
What?
It'll be like a quick fire round because there's a vote.
Give a
coming.
vote at half 10, have you?
That focuses the
We'll
mind.
try and push around. That's yes, then.
Brian, do you want to make some brief opening comments, including covering how the DFP's proposed new scheme arrangements differ from the current arrangements for the committee's benefit? And then,
Well, we have been up with the committee previously explaining the differences between the existing compensation scheme and the scheme which was being proposed originally, which was a scheme which has operated in the UK civil service since 2010. And we were up on the superannuation bill, making the case against the proposed amendments to the superannuation bill, because the amendments which were being put forward would effectively remove the veto that the staff representative organisations, the trade unions, would have over any detrimental changes to the redundancy compensation scheme. So we lost that argument in the sense that the amendments were made, but it was agreed, and I think the Assembly did agree, that there would be a requirement for DFP to come forward with a statement or a report on the consultation that had taken place with the trade unions about any new scheme. And that was a requirement which the Assembly, I think on the committee's recommendation, introduced. We have been involved in, I suppose, a series of meetings in the Pensions Forum on the compensation scheme with DFP officials over a period of time since then, and we now have those consultations have been, we had the debate on the consultations about what it meant, what consultation meant, and you got a report, I think, from the Assembly Research people, so you did on that. Basically, our view is that the consultation really, our concerns and fears were realised because we said it the last time we were up at the committee that the veto was being transferred from the trade unions effectively to the DFP, to the employer, and therefore, whereas we had the veto in the first place, they now have the veto, so they can do what they like effectively. And the negotiations, the consultations which we were engaged in with DFP, with Grace and the others, it was clear that they were under a direction from the then Finance Minister that it was going to be strict parity which applied. Now, we, as the trade unions, we had a leap of faith in that we put on the table proposals which were a variation. They were still detrimental proposals, but in order to kick-start proper consultation, we said that we would be prepared to agree to the original proposals that the then Labour government, back I think in 2008 and 2009, had put on the table. They were then superseded by proposals which had been made, which the current coalition government in the UK had. We said we were prepared to look and negotiate and discuss around those proposals, but the response was no. The response was that there's only going to be nuanced changes to on the margins, and we thought that wasn't proper consultation. At the end of the day, well, we also said to DFP, says, look, what are you going to do? How are you going to go and report to the committee? You did commit to proper consultation, you would engage with the trade unions and you would try and reach agreement. How are you going to come along to the committee and say, it's as it was, it's exactly the same proposals that you have in GB, and therefore they're going to say, well, really, what sort of a consultation was that? I mean, what sort of commitment was that to engage constructively with the trade unions? So what they have actually done is they've come forward in the scheme with a slight change to the UK regulations, which increases the minimum salary for the purposes of calculating redundancy payment, and a reduction in the maximum salary for the purposes of calculating redundancy payment. And to be honest, while those changes are welcome, they're very much on the margins, and it doesn't sort of convince us that there was any real commitment to consulting with us about an alternative scheme. We were prepared to make significant compromises and concessions, but we didn't, and we put those on the table, but we didn't even get into having a discussion about those proposals because of the view that R&D should strictly apply. So what we have now is a slightly amended version of the UK regulations, and our view is that that slightly amended version is in order to provide a fig leaf for the promised consultation that was going to take place. And the last week, Chair has, I think, reinforced our position. We have got that bad news. All of us have got the bad news that despite the all-party campaign to save the DVA, the jobs in Coleraine, the UK government effectively has decided that they're going to be centralised in We have been told by DFP that there's no plans for redundancies, that there's not going to be, this isn't really going to affect anybody because there are no redundancies down the pipeline. And therefore it was an exercise to get us strictly in line in parity terms with GB. But here we have a situation where the UK government has effectively taken a decision which is going to result in a loss of 300 jobs in the Coleraine area, with all the economic consequences for that area. And that's out of our control. I know all the parties, we appreciate the support that all the parties gave to the workers in DVA, and there's a rally on Friday, as you know, and we're trying to do what we can to build up some leverage to reverse that decision. It's not going to be easy. But because that decision has been taken, it's very likely, well, it's not unlikely, that there will be voluntary or compulsory redundancies in the Coleraine area as a result of the DVA. There's not a lot of scope for redeployment in Coleraine, and many people would well be offered alternative employment in the Belfast area or the Greater Belfast area. A lot of people are in Coleraine were originally from Coleraine, worked in Belfast, and then got a transfer back, as many civil servants do. And we have a lot of people who will have domestic and caring responsibilities, whose days are organised in such a way where they can do these, leaving kids at school, looking after elderly relatives, and be able to manage getting into work on time and back out again, whatever. If they're redeployed away from their hometown, then that's going to make that very difficult. So I think you're potentially talking about certainly voluntary redundancies, if not compulsory redundancies. And what the Assembly has in its power then, it's the power to decide that if these people are going to be made redundant, then at least, despite the decision of the British government, the UK government to abolish these jobs and centralise them in Swansea, at least the Assembly has the opportunity of maintaining the current scheme, therefore allow these people to get decent redundancy payments at a time whenever they need them most. So that would be my initial comments. I'm sure our colleagues, Billy Lynn or Michael McKeown, have anything to say.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Brian, just in terms of the consultation, obviously the committee would be aware of the gunning or settling principles. Do you have any view on how the department failed to meet those? Obviously they were set out and have been explicitly adopted by the Court of Appeal locally. And does NIPSA plan to seek any legal action and a judicial review in regard to this moving forward?
Well, we do have the details of that, and it's something that we are giving consideration to. But we are, but we have been. We don't like to have recourse to legal action. I have to say, as a union, we don't have an awful lot of faith in the legal system to deliver justice for our members. We've just lost a judicial review against the PSNI in relation to the outsourcing issue. And we have other legal actions ongoing. We did have one in respect of the Northern Ireland Social Care Council and Minister Coots, which was a successful one. But from in Northern Ireland terms, we are a fairly large union, but taking legal action that has potential significant legal costs, which is something which we have to bear in mind. Therefore, our first protocol in many ways is trying to get a political decision. That's what the political institutions are for. You can get a political decision that the right decisions are made and that proper consultation takes place. That's something that we would have to consider in more detail if the regulations are adopted. And as you know, I think it's negative resolution, and the regulations presumably have to be led 21 days before the 1st of April, and the only way in which they can be, unless they're withdrawn, of course, as a result of the pressure the committee can exert, the only way in which they can be sort of, I'm not sure what the term is, sort of removed, is if there is a majority of MLAs praying against the regulations in the Assembly itself.
In paragraph 8, you make reference to proposals that the NIPS had put forward themselves, and they were rejected out of hand. I understand you don't want to disclose this, but could you elaborate at all in terms of those proposals?
I don't have the details with me, and they're quite complex. But these are proposals which the civil service that were on the table in the UK civil service prior to the election of the coalition government in 2010, wasn't it? May 2010. What happened then was there was arguments with the unions over those, and some unions accepted those and some had rejected those. What then happened whenever you had the new government taken up office in May 2010? They then changed the proposals. And in fact, there were worse proposals. I don't know where they're fairly complex, so they are. I'm not sure where to start. They're not as draconian or not as extreme or far-reaching as the ones which are currently on the table from DFP. So they're not. And we had put those on the table as an alternative. Now, I have to say, we had to get clearance from our executive committee, because for us to come and propose something which is detrimental to what we already have was a leap of faith. But we had a fair idea, let me say, we had a fair idea that if we put those proposals on the table, that there wouldn't be any response, that it wouldn't get any, it wouldn't really get a hearing from the DFP officials because of the position of the finance minister. And we understand the finance minister's position on the parity issue, but this isn't an issue which, like welfare reform or the pensions bill, is going to have an impact upon the block grant. If there are redundancies, it will cost a bit more with the current proposals. It's not as if you don't adopt if you maintain the current compensation scheme, that the Treasurer are going to come along and say, well, it's X million per year coming out of the block grant. It's not the same issue. All it means is that out of the block grant of each department, if there are voluntary or compulsory redundancies, there would be that bit more. They would have to pay that bit more. Effectively, and Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, most people stand to lose about a year's redundancy payment if these proposals are introduced, as opposed to the current scheme regulations being maintained. And as, for instance, in the DVA case, that would be a significant blow to people who, through a decision which we all object to, made by the Transport Minister or whoever in Britain, that those jobs are gone. The jobs are being lost, and you find yourselves in a position where you're going to make changes to regulations which actually reduce the redundancy compensation of staff like that, and at a time whenever they're most in need of whatever financial support they can. So we think this is probably the worst time to be making these changes, and there's a strong argument to be saying, look, let's put this in abeyance for a period of time anyway, to see what the redundancy situation is going. Oh, Simon Hamilton, the current finance minister, made a statement last week, I think, about the difficulties and the potential for job losses coming along the lines. But that's at various with what DFP officials have been telling us. They're saying, what are you worried about? They're saying there's no plans for any redundancies. But now we're here, and therefore nobody's going to be affected by these changes. But yet we're here now with the DVA situation, and we have the warnings from the finance minister that potentially significant redundancies coming down the line, potentially.
Leslie?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Brendan. Just 2 points sort of readily occurred to me. The first one is DFP officials were talking about no real threat of redundancy. How sort of guaranteed would that threat be, and how far into the future would it go? Did you explore that sort of thing? Could they give you, for example, a guarantee that nothing would happen within 5 years or something like that?
No, but of course the DFP officials are sharp enough in the sense they would never give a guarantee that there won't be any redundancies. They'd say, look, there's no foreseeable redundancies
At this time.
but we don't know what the future is going to hold. But since they said that, we have the DVA situation and we have Simon's statement last week. So they wouldn't, they would know themselves that they couldn't give any absolute guarantees. So
It's not too comforting. The other point is, mention's always made that this particular scheme doesn't compare with other Northern Ireland civil service schemes. I don't think we've ever really explored just what the differences were, but first of all, is it true, and how different are those other schemes?
the other public service schemes, they're I think it would be true to say that the civil service scheme is better than most other public sector schemes. These proposals actually technically would make the civil service scheme less favourable than the other schemes, because the other schemes I think generally have 2 years, up to a max of 2 years pay, 104 weeks compensation, whereas the terms of this scheme that's been produced actually is less than that, so it is 6 months less. There is scope on a voluntary basis to organise, to pay people up to 2 years, but there's no requirement on departments to do that. And I suppose from our point of view, well, we appreciate that, but we don't like this race to the bottom business. If there are schemes which have less provisions, then that those who have the better provisions should be reduced to the lesser provisions. I mean, there's been different historical development in relation to how our schemes came about, through the local government scheme, through the teacher scheme, firefighter scheme, and the civil service scheme. They've all been subject, by and large, to separate negotiations in different jurisdictions, really, and it's a fact of life. But I think it really is a red herring, because it was never an argument that was used in the UK that they were bringing the civil service scheme into line with the other public sector schemes.
Thanks for that, Brian.
Okay, Mitchell?
Yeah, I mean, it's rock and a hard place stuff really for us all, because I know you're confronted as we are with the concerns about the other pressures that are about in welfare reform looming very large. In what I'd be interested in establishing is, can we demonstrate that there wasn't an engagement, there wasn't a discussion with a view to reach an agreement, and can we tease that out? I mean, I actually am impressed by the fact that you come up with an alternative proposition that I'm sure caused you some pain. We don't really have all of the detail of that, but does that permit the possibility that we can establish that there wasn't a bona fide engagement?
I think, I mean, we have the minutes of the various meetings of the Pensions Forum which we can provide. And, well, I'm not criticising DFP officials. I think they were in a difficult situation because the directions that they were on.
You explained that they had a very clear...
And therefore, I mean, our judgment and our reading of the situation was that it was going to be very difficult. And because we weren't getting any movement, we decided to, we'll see how real their intentions are. So we said we'd put this on the table. And with a fair degree of knowledge that it was going to put them behind the 8 ball, so to speak. Because here was a proposal which involved detriment, which we were reluctantly putting forward, and then let's see your colour your money. Let's see how realistic you are when you're talking about proper consultation with a view to reaching an agreement. And nothing was happening at all. And it was only at a very late stage that they come up with the proposal about the min and they adjust the min and the max. And to be honest, while it's welcome, I think that was to save their embarrassment of having to report to you that they made absolutely no changes to what the original proposals were. And in that sense, I don't. If you read we were there. We were all at the meetings, and we knew what the restrictions and the parameters of the officials were. And I think a phrase was used before: "A blind man in a hurry." We'd have been able to recognise that it wasn't genuine consultation.
Well, I mean, there is an agreed position there, and it either was it was either a genuine engagement or not. You seem to be indicating that they recognise some pressure there, in that they went for this kind of medium position between the minimum and the maximum. We will obviously be talking to the department officials as well. But we probably would need to really put some flesh in these arguments to explore whether, in fact, they were seeking agreement, right? And we'll not revisit all the kind of the historical stuff or what used to be in terms of the veto and all. We know where we are now. I've mentioned the fact that we have to be very conscious that there are genuine pressures. It's not imagined. It's not propaganda arguments, and the executive and their officials do have a very challenging kind of situation. Yet at the same time, we want to kind of ensure that it's as fair as practicable.
But I would reiterate the point that maintaining this current scheme doesn't result in a reduction in the block grant, in the way that the Treasury has warned that if you don't introduce the pensions bill, and if you don't introduce welfare reform, that they will subtract whatever amount they think they're due. This is purely within the gift of the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Yeah, but you're not arguing that it doesn't have an impact.
It would have an impact.
It doesn't result in a reduction, but it has an impact.
No, it would have an impact.
It's still the one cake.
Of course, it would have an impact in respect of if there are redundancies. It means you're paying that bit more, a little bit more. Not a lot in overall terms to the block grant, but significant for individuals and their families who are in a redundancy situation. And what I would say about the consultation is the people that we were dealing with were obviously genuine, but the engagement wasn't. And we'd be happy to, elaborate a bit on that. But the difficult time is of the essence, presumably, because the regulations will have had to be laid 21 days before the 1st of April, because that's the date that they want these to take effect.
Yeah, well, for now, really, I think all I can ask for, because we'll have to consider what we can do in the time that's available to us, is a commitment from yourselves just to service that examination if we have the opportunity to do so. And decide to do so, of course, there'll have to be an agreement at the committee. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Deputy Chair.
Thanks. Morning. When you said that the engagement wasn't genuine, would that be an objective or a subjective view?
I think it would be a subjective view, but anybody outside looking in on it from an objective point of view would come to the same conclusions we have.
Right.
I think if the facts are put on the table and we had asked someone outside of the people who were at the negotiations or consultations to...
Can I ask you, what were the indications that it wasn't a genuine engagement?
Because they said that as far as the Minister was concerned, that he wanted a strict application of parity, and that there could only be any changes would only be marginal. And I think what the phrase used was that there would be some nuance. There could be some nuances, and we got into an argument with them, a debate about them about nuances, what nuances meant. And we had made I don't know where you've seen some of this detail, but we made the argument that things can be slightly nuanced, or things can be heavily nuanced. And we provided, I don't have it here, but we provided a colour chart to DFP, I think it was blue, with about 48 different shades of different nuances of blue, and saying that anywhere within that is a nuanced version of a blue. And what we wanted was something in the middle whereas they were down here. We can provide this to you, so was, you know, it generated some mirth.
So you're saying that they
generated some mirth, so it did.
You're saying that the adjustments they made, the maximum and minimum adjustments, that they were the lightest shade of blue?
Well, yes. I mean, they were very much at the next shade to what the original proposals were, whereas we wanted somewhere of a shade a little bit further on.
It kind of sounds like the title of a song, doesn't it? Or was that a wider shade?
Title of a book,
Wider
maybe.
shade,
Yeah.
It's gone back too long, that. Hey, because of the nature of redundancies, it's really impossible to put a cost on it, isn't it?
Well, you could sort of. It's impossible to put a definitive cost on it, but you know, you could sort of come up with a number of scenarios of 100 people were being made redundant in different grades at different salaries with different years' service. This is what the cost would be.
Yeah.
You could do that, so you could.
But some years there may be no cost, other years there may be cost,
Yes.
and so on.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to put a figure on it.
And there's an argument to say the more costly redundancy is, the bigger the disincentive is to make people redundant. You know, on the overall scale of things, in terms of the Northern Ireland Block Grant, maintaining the current scheme is on the very margins, it's on the edges. But what it means to individual families is significant, so it is. And I think that would be the point that we would make.
But, you know, the point I'm making is that it's very difficult to judge the difference in cost between the new scheme, which is being proposed by the department, and maintaining the old scheme.
Unless you knew for sure how many redundancies were going to be, what grades they were in, what salaries the people were on, and what length of service they had, you would be able to do it if you knew in advance that sort of matrix of factors and in relation to the numbers and types of people and service that the individual and salaries that the individuals had. That's the only way you could work it out definitively, I think. So, but again, it's. And I think DFP officials have said to us, look, this isn't a cost-cutting measure. This is in order to align the Northern Ireland scheme with the UK scheme. And from our point of view, especially a week after the UK government made a decision to cut 300 jobs in Coleraine, that's almost, we think, an incentive for the Assembly to say, well, we'll just maintain our scheme then.
But if it's not cost-cutting, did they outline the advantages of parity to us?
I think it's probably a broad principle that they are more comfortable with maintaining. But of course, if there's evolved government and there isn't a big cost involved, then this is a sort of issue in which there is scope for doing our own thing without breaking the bank or without causing a big hit on public expenditure. And I think, you know, the Assembly can do something for workers who find themselves redundant, especially if they're redundant as a result, potentially redundant as a result of a UK government decision. That at least you can do something to mitigate that impact.
Give them the best deal possible.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
John?
Thanks, Chair. Good to see you. I was stuck all last week with Brian, you know.
I saw that's mutual, John.
Yes, I know. They really just following on from Dominic. I mean, I suspect probably as a committee, I certainly would be broadly sympathetic to the argument you're putting out. I would be worried about the financial impact as to whether we're moving into a position of almost writing a blank cheque for how much this could cost each department. You know, that's, I think, the bit that I would need most convincing over. You know, I accept the point entirely, Brian, about, you know, someone like the workers up in Coleraine, that group, that you're suddenly going to be faced in that they would lose the equivalent of a year's redundancy. I think it's a serious impact on somebody at a very, very vulnerable time, you know, for families. But that it's over the overall cost envelope, I would be concerned.
One of the, I mean, I'm not proposing this, but one of the approaches that you could adopt is that we have the DVA situation. I think there's some indication, I know they're talking about July, but there's also some talk about up to the end of the year they may be required to do certain things. And in order to try and establish in more real terms what the impact is going to be, there's certainly at least an argument for saying, well, this isn't the appropriate time to introduce these changes.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens in the next year or even 2 years. And without, you know, if people are so committed to parity without jettisoning it completely, you can say, well, look, let's give this a bit more time to see how the job situation is going to work out within the civil service. And that will give us an idea of the cost as well and the scale. And that's one approach that could be taken by ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's a fair point, Chair, that you could actually, by a bit more time, would give you a much better idea as to the impact it would do. Thanks.
Okay, John. Brian, thanks very much.
Sure,
Ours will cut short.
You going for it?
Members, just inform you the meeting's now closed, so if everyone could take their materials.